Welcome to Raising Well-Nourished Kids, your go-to parenting podcast for everyday strategies to help you raise emotionally resilient, happy, food-loving kids.
Hi, I'm Georgia Harding, a naturopath, founder of the Well-Nourished Family Membership and proud mum of two thriving teenagers.
And I'm Jane Faulkner, a practicing psychotherapist, the founder of Equine Assisted Therapy Australia, and also a mum of two beautiful, busy kiddos.
Join us every week as we share practical tips to set your kids up for healthier eating habits, body positivity, and a lifelong love of whole foods. Let's dive in.
Hey, welcome to this week's podcast. So we are so excited to be talking to the amazing Belinda Smith. Belle is one of Australia's leading independent voices for children's health. She's an author of The Lunchbox Effect, an advocate for real food in schools, and founder of The Root Cause, a socially driven business dedicated to standing for children's health, so needed in today's world.
Absolutely, yeah. So Belle travelled Australia for 2.5 years, visiting 100 schools and communities, empowering children, parents and teachers to make better food choices. Her school programs have now reached a whopping 290 schools and 65,000 children, parents and teachers.
Amazing.
Yeah, she is amazing. Belle empowers whole school communities and families to make friends with food so that they navigate today's food culture and be an advocate for their own health, creating lifelong, nourishing friendships with food. She has been featured on Australian national and regional TV and radio. She's been a guest expert on ABC Radio and Broken Hill, and her work has even been mentioned in Australian Parliament, which is amazing. Belle's vision is to create a generation of healthy food literate children, just like Jane and I's, who choose food grown in nature every day. So these children then go on to lead the next generation of children into wellness. Yes. She's also a firm believer that when kids become empowered, our jobs as parents become easier. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. We certainly love talking to Belle.
Totally.
Are you looking to nurture well-nourished kids but feel overwhelmed by picky eating battles and a lack of support?
Our online program, Raising Well-Nourished Kids, is designed to empower parents just like you.
With lifetime access to 10 user-friendly modules, you'll gain the essential tools for raising children who adore wholesome foods.
Plus, our monthly confidential Q&A sessions offer personalised guidance and support.
Don't navigate parenting alone. Let us be your allies.
Click the link in the show notes to learn more.
Welcome, Belle. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast this week.
Yes, thanks, Belle. Thanks for your time.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Now, you and I have definitely crossed paths for many, many years. We definitely have or share similar passions when it comes to kids' health. But for those people who are listening who haven't come across the incredible work you do, just tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to the decision to start a movement and a business that stands for children's health.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I mean, this story still catches in my throat because I was 42, had a daughter that was 5 and had just given birth to our son. And about 3 or 4 months in, my husband was diagnosed with postnatal depression. And so we're talking 14 years ago now. And his psychologist said, you need to start looking at sleep hygiene, exercise regime, and food. And I actually thought I was doing pretty good on the food front. Like I cooked at home from scratch, or so I thought, until I started to learn about food and I realized I was using like jars of chicken tonight and Dolmio's pasta sauce. And then when I really got honest and looked in my daughter's lunchbox, there was potato sticks, which were dehydrated potato, and there was barbecue shapes and tiny teddies. And that's when I really started to learn that, you know, these foods can have an impact. And back then, there was only one scientific study that I could find that linked food to depression.
Wow.
Yeah. And fast forward to today, like we all know, like I'm sure your listeners that are here are well across health. and hearing everything about gut health. And so we now know it's quite prolific, the connection between food. So that's how it all started for me, was because I had this desire to help improve his mental health because he didn't want to go on medication. And so I said, well, if you don't want to do that, then we have to really be serious about changing what we're doing. And that just opened up everything for us. And the more I started to learn, I started to study around the clock, and I was just doing health coaching studies, and I learnt so much about food in those studies that I just wanted to share it, like scream it from the rooftops, like we're being hoodwinked, and one of my friends said, Belle, you're coming across like a nut job. Right. And so at that stage, my husband and I were talking about packing up and leaving Sydney and travelling Australia. And so one night I said to him, why don't we get a bus and we'll make it into a big mobile billboard, and as we travel around, we'll raise awareness. And by that stage, I had accidentally fallen into writing a schools program because my daughter was getting teased about her lunch boxes. And her teacher said, come in and talk to the kids about why you pack Indrani's lunchbox the way you do. And I thought, I'm just going to make this fun because I don't want it to embarrass her. So I made some food experiments and called it the Mad Food Science Incursion. And overnight I had parents writing to me saying, my son's pulling things out of the pantry and reading the packets. And the teacher told the principal about, we're selling this stuff in the school canteen. And then all of a sudden I was back at that school doing the whole school, and then it kind of just bounced around and I was doing it for free. So when we travelled Australia, we thought we'd test it out and see if it was viable, and we went to 90 schools right around the country. And keep in mind, when I was first started, I was living in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and pretty, I guess, well-to-do families, but parents were busy and we were relying on convenience food, just like what I was. And I was shocked that the more we travelled to discover that it was actually really widespread. And there was a lot of people that were like us that were raising awareness, but there was a lot more people who had no idea. And that for me, really that 2.5 years we did that around the country. And it just blew my mind that, that there was so little information out there about what we were feeding our kids.
Yeah, totally.
I can remember actually way back when you started posting, like someone somehow pointed me in your direction, and I was watching like the development of like your bus getting renovated and spray painted, and just, it was like you said, it literally was a mobile billboard for kids' health.
So cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Belle, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you said your family you thought you were cooking at home, but you were cooking out of jars. Like, how did you transition? Because this can be really challenging for a lot of families, to transition and to get your kids kind of embracing the whole food and your partner. Were there steps you took, or what kind of helped?
Well, that's a great question, actually, because I had some big epic fails. I went from, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what we have to do. And there was tears, there was tantrums, mostly my tears, to be honest. Yeah. Because I would slave cooking this thing and no one would, make it. And I remember going to a friend's party and I made a cheesecake, but it was an avocado lime cheesecake. And my husband said, don't say that is a cheesecake. Do not tell anyone it's a cheesecake. It's not a cheesecake, And then there was another night where I said, we're having tacos tonight. And he comes to the table all excited, but I'd made mince using mushroom and walnuts. And he's like, where's the mince? And I'm like, there's none. This is what we're having. And then there was the night that I actually made tofu quiche. And it was at that point where I realised that I might be ready for this, but nobody else is. So I had to start thinking about this. I put on my old corporate hat of project management, which is, you think about where you want to be and what are the little steps. And so that little step that I thought was, okay, I just actually want them to get to eat more vegetables. And so instead of waiting for dinner time, afternoon tea would actually be where my vegetables were. Like they'd get home from daycare or school, and instead of just having, you know, like the bloody shapes or whatever, small shapes that I would normally have, I actually would put a few of them out with some cheese, and then I would have veggie sticks and I would make different dips. And that was just the starting point. And then quite often I would leave them out on the dinner table, and we would then have our dinner along with what was left over from that. So that was my first focus. And if I could say anything to parents, it's this: we might be ready, but if we make that big jump, we're then dragging them along, and we have this expectation up here and they're down here. And in between, right, is our disappointment, our gap, like our frustration, our anger, our tears. So it's just like, what's that one little thing that you can take, and to remember that it's not a race. As long as every day you're doing something that's putting you in the right direction. And I think, you know, this is now 14 years for me. And I remember it was 2016, and we were travelling the bus, and I was looking down and thinking, we're still eating like Wheat Bix and Cocoa Pops, you know, like what's going on here? And here I am travelling around telling everyone, you know, and then I realised it's all right. You know what? You've worked on dinners. You've got that sorted. You've worked on lunch boxes. You've got that sorted. Okay, let's now start breakfast, you know. And I think we just need to give ourselves grace that this is a journey. And I always use the analogy of, you know, when your kids are babies and they're on their tummy and they're learning to roll onto their back, and then they get up on their haunches, then they crawl, then they furniture surf, then they walk and ride, bike, run, all of that. We're just gently around the side, and we let them get there in their own time. But when it gets food, we get cray-cray. Like, you know.
We often talk about, or Jane talks about, planting seeds. You know, like our job as parents is just to plant seeds, and they may not, you know, bloom, you know, immediately. Eventually they will, but you just keep planting the seeds. And we talk about the 1%ers all the time as well.
And for me, the relationship, like that relationship with your kids is more important and that you kind of thank you so much for sharing that. Like that, it's just those small transitions that you're doing together at a pace that everyone can kind of tolerate.
Absolutely. So just getting back to kids' health, Belle, you know, what is actually happening in children's health in Australia today, and how do you see, you know, that food's connected? So, you know, perhaps share with us what you're seeing in schools across Australia, what schools are dealing with, because I know that that's where you're at the moment. I know you've spoken about where you've been with you know, travelling around Australia, but the work that you're doing right now is just so important.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, I think if it's all right, I'd love to start with the stats around children's health before jumping into schools, because I would love to say that the stats have got better from when I first started this work, but they really haven't. Like 14 years ago, 41% of Australian children had some kind of chronic health condition. Today, it's 45%. So people might think, oh, you know what, that's over 14 years, that's only 4%. But that works out to be like 19,000 children a year over those 14 years. Every year, 19,000 extra children are diagnosed with at least one chronic health condition. So when you think of it, I always ask parents to think back when they were at school. How many kids did they have in their class that were living with a chronic illness? So it's massive. And then on top of that, we know that 25% of primary age children are reporting high levels of anxiety. And conditions that were adult onset once, like diabetes type 2, children are now being diagnosed with it. I've worked with an integrative paediatrician who is one of my experts, and she's treating children with high blood pressure and children that are having strokes. So it's really not a great picture for children's health.
Belle, did I hear you right? Did you say 45%
nearly
of kids?
Half.
Like nearly half of kids?
Yeah.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. I even know from when I first started practicing, which was over 20 years ago, just, yes, I saw a lot of children, but generally when I saw kids, it wasn't for chronic health conditions. It was like reoccurring, colds and flus and earaches and things like that. And allergies were, they were kind of a little bit of a thing, but they weren't massive. It was quite unusual for me to see someone definitely with multiple allergies like you see these days. So I just know in the space of 20 years myself, even since I've started Well Nourished, which is around the same as you, about 14 years, how just what my audience tell me about the health of their children, how that has just changed. So the landscape has changed completely.
Well, Australia is a world leader in the rate of allergies and asthma. Like, can you fathom that? Like, per capita, we are the world leader. It's crazy. And asthma is one of the biggest reasons why children don't go to school in Australia, like for school absences. So,
asthma and anxiety. Hey, so Belle, how do you think food's connected?
Well, firstly, when I travelled Australia, it was mind-blowing, like how many teachers would come up to me and say that they would see it in their classroom. So when I travelled for the 2.5 years, all I did was grab, anecdotal evidence of what parents were telling me, what the teachers were telling me, because I just didn't have time to research at that point. But what I did have over 2.5 years was a collection of stories that people were saying, I see the difference when my child's had this, and this. So when I got back, I spent nearly 18 months researching and trying to find scientific papers that actually supported it. And that was the culmination of me writing my book, The Lunchbox Effect. Because unless people think that it's backed by science, all of those parents that are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, they're not given the credence that they should. Like that, they are really seeing the difference, and they get called the nut jobs, or they get called that mum because they're doing it right. So I really wanted the book to be in celebration of those parents who had identified this and had made changes. For all the parents who were in George's lunchbox group, Well Nourished Lunchbox, for them to say, keep doing what you're doing. We need you to keep doing this. And then
it's affirmative, isn't it?
Yes.
That you're doing this and this is why you're doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And so, but even then, since that was, 2018, now the research is phenomenal that's linking food to our gut health, which is then playing out in all manner of things. So if anyone's really interested, follow Professor Felice Jacka from the Food and Mood Centre. They are putting out some great information around this. But there's
and your book has phenomenal statistics in it.
Yeah, I mean, and now it's outdated. I really need to update. The landscape has changed. The amount of research has changed.
Yeah, right.
And it's just also because we go into schools, you experience it. So I'll flick to what's going on in schools. Very different from when I first started, right? Like back when I first started, it was very rare for a class. Like we take 100 kids in a hall at once and we have experiment stations. There might be 3 to 5 classes in there. And you would sometimes have one learning support officer in a hall with 100 kids plus their teachers. Fast forward to today, most schools will have 1 to 2 learning support officers per class because there's children who need additional support. Now, we can't link all of that to food, obviously, but there's certainly still that anecdotal thing of talking to parents and teachers that they know that food's connected. But then there's also now the science that's really quite clear that's linking a lot of this. And I think there was the Institute of Education in London released a conceptual model that looked at a wide range of scientific studies connecting food to childhood outcomes, health outcomes. And they've basically been able to put it into a picture that shows that, different nutrients and the kinds of foods that you're eating link through to cognition, to fine motor skills, to behaviour, to learning, to ADHD, and then it goes on and then it affects social skills and then it affects academic achievements, it affects attendance rates. And so there's just this whole arc of how food actually affects it. And it's only now like that it's being a bit more widely spoken about, that even schools are prepared to talk about it. Before, it was almost like they just wanted to tick the box to say they've done something for the curriculum. Whereas we're actually saying this is bigger. This can be an improvement tool in your school if you focus on it. So and
it's a win-win for everyone, isn't it?
It is.
For the children, for the teachers, for the school system as a whole, for kids in the class, all kids in the classroom, not just the children who are struggling to concentrate and focus.
And Belle, I'm really glad we're talking about this, and you've got the 14 years to kind of share. Because I think, you know, when you're a parent and you're in that situation, it's kind of like the boiling frog analogy. You know, when a frog's put in a cold pot and it's brought to the boil, it doesn't notice the water heating up. And I feel like this is parents today. Stuff that isn't normal is becoming normalized, you know, like all these different conditions. That 45% of kids are being diagnosed with chronic illness, I think, because it's been such a slow, insidious build. So I love that you're going back and kind of saying this is how it was back then and this is how it is now, just to kind of say, actually, it's not normal and we do need to make big changes, and we do need to really kind of, and I guess to affirm parents that are kind of saying, it's not normal and I need to make changes, that are going back to schools or places where they're called nut jobs, because then they are kind of saying, no, this isn't right. So I'm really glad you've got that span of time, I guess, to kind of reflect on.
And, you know, it's playing out in so many ways too. Like the education system is really, really full. And then on top of that, the teachers are dealing with a lot with the curriculum, but they're also dealing a lot with behaviour. And as a result, you know, and there's also obviously also a big fallout still post-COVID, but they're leaving the profession in droves. The principals are being physically and verbally abused, and, you know, like the stress levels are getting up and up. And when you think of it, I always like to say to parents, these kids are the future leaders of our country, and they're also supposed to be the people who will be in the workforce helping you and I to have tax-paid retirement, you know. But that's, if we've got nearly half of these kids already that have some kind of condition, what's the likelihood that they're going to, you know, be productive in the workforce? Are they going to be more in the medical system? And therefore, what does it mean? Like, there's so many kind of knock-on impacts when we think further down the track. And I don't say this to make anyone get fearful. It's just like, it's time, people. Like, we do need to look at this. And I want to acknowledge all the people who will be here listening to your podcast, because you're already standing for children's health. The fact that you are here listening to, you know, Georgia and Jane, you know, and it's probably not the only thing that you're listening to and reading. Please keep doing it, because we need people like you to pull the other people up. So don't ever feel that, you know, like when people say you're that mum, like give yourself a, like, on your chest, because we need that.
And we have, and we have actually, we've done a podcast on being that mum and health food shaming, because it is so prevalent. You know, I see it even in the online world, where, you know, a mum will post a healthy lunchbox, and I've experienced it, and you probably have as well. And then I'd get attacked. Like, there was a time when I actually stopped. It was too much. And I know you and I, Belle, have spoken about that how sometimes it just does feel so overwhelming, because you're just up against it. You know, you don't, you know, if I were to post, you know, some sort of fast food on my feed, you know, I probably wouldn't cop half the flack that when I was younger and I was just starting out. Not so much now that my brand's established, people know what I'm about, but when I was just starting out, I would cop so much flack. And it's hard. And I know that I consider you to be so resilient, because I know that school space is so tough, because you've not only got, you're battling against bureaucracy, unfortunately, and that's hard.
It is.
And people that are already overwhelmed, hey, and this is what makes people attack.
Yeah.
When they feel like they don't have the skills, the resources, the support to do it too.
Yeah.
And I love how you said, Belle, like if you're already one of those mums, to pull people along. It's kind of knowing, I guess, as one of those mums, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Like we're here, you're here.
Yeah.
And that it's education. It's educating people. Like this isn't a competition. We're all doing our best. Just do that one little step, like you said at the beginning. Just add some veggies to the plate with the shake.
I think
and sometimes I often think that parents think, well, this isn't my end game. This isn't the ultimate, this isn't, but like you said, it's small steps to the end game.
Yeah.
You can't just jump to the end game. It doesn't work.
No, I mean, I tried.
And look, we've all tried. Yeah. We've all tried that with any change that we make within the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say something that we've been doing since 2019, when we've partnered with schools, we've tried to help them with data, because, everyone says you need data to make decisions. So we started doing a food and waste survey with the schools, where we would get them to, have a look at lunchboxes. And it's not like scrutinising lunchboxes. It's a real, kids are, hand up if you've got a muesli bar today, hand up if you've got a sandwich. So it's not, like anything dramatic. But what we've gathered now we've got over 24,000 lunchboxes across 109 schools and over 1,000 classes. So we can clearly say across that what the average lunchbox looks like. And that's schools right around the country. And we know that there's 2.2 packet foods in a lunchbox and 10.7 additives. So keep in mind, all of the latest research is actually showing a very strong correlation between the no longer just sugar, salt and fat. It's actually the level of processing in a food. So the further it is from nature, the more industrialized and ultra-processed it is, and the less it's likely to be supporting health. So 2.2 packet foods, 10.7 additives. So most of these are things that we can never have in our own pantry at home. 4.4 teaspoons of sugar. So that's, put it in context. The World Health Organization says us adults, for optimal health, should try to limit to 6 teaspoons a day. So kids probably 3 to 5 in primary school, and then in their lunchbox, they're nearly having that whole amount. So, and we also know that fruits pretty much turns up in every lunchbox, which is great. Very little vegetables, like 0.4 of the lunchboxes have vegetables in them. Wow. So I always say to people, although like lunchboxes is like you, Georgia, is like, for me, they're really important. It's not really the starting place, because kids get 15 minutes on average at school to eat. And it's pitched against talking time. Part of the problem. It is.
Yeah, and that's I think really one of the foundations for lunchtime being a real problem here in Australia anyway.
Yeah, definitely. We don't give it the importance that it is desired. No. And, subsequently kids come out, they've been stuck in a classroom and they get 15 minutes, but at that same 15 minutes, they're trying to talk to their friends as well. So they're not eating as much. And then that's why we get so many kids coming home with lunch boxes half full and parents getting upset about food waste. And so there is a bit of a movement in some schools around the country to switch playtime before the eating time, so that kids go off and play with their kids and then they come back and eat. But they're still only getting 15 minutes.
I think that it's a very, very good step in the right direction. And also just allocating time, like this is the time you play and this is the time you eat, I think is important, because I know in my kids' school anyway, they might be given a half an hour break time, but like you said, they would rather go and play soccer with their mates than actually eat what's in their lunchbox. Or my kids were always torn because they love their food, so it was always a matter of shoving food in, but also being drawn towards the playground.
So, Belle, when you think of food and kids, is there a way that we should talk to kids about food, and why do you think words and, like, I guess our attitudes and words towards food is important?
This is a fantastic question, because even the way I do things now is so different to when I first started. So, back when I first started, the whole premise behind children's health was the rising rates of obesity. And back then, so going back 14 years ago, right? And there's a study that was released in 2005 by the New England Journal of Medicine that was indicating that for the first time, this generation of children may have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. Now, you know what? Last year, Queensland, Health and Wellbeing Queensland released their own Queensland data that showed that children who were born in 2023 and beyond, unless we dramatically changed the way we fed those children, they would have a shorter life expectancy. So that's massive in itself. But if we look at the way we used to talk about food, even when we were growing up, my mum would talk about food that we couldn't afford, which is largely ultra processed. That would be junk food or party food, and you would only ever get it if you went to a party or it was Christmas time, and and it really was a treat, right?
Yeah.
But today, those foods are being eaten by children every single day, and so that language is actually outdated, because they just see it as food. So no amount of us saying it's bad or it's good or it's junk or whatever is actually going to change it, because we're feeding it to them every day. So they just see it as food. So what we need to do is kind of flick it on their head and get them to be able to connect into how is that food making them feel, rather than, like labeling the food per se. And this has also come about, I guess there's been an escalation in the rate of eating disorders and disordered eating. Looks like it's come off the back of COVID. Now, a lot of the way people think of food, it's not necessarily the food that becomes the problem with eating disorders and disordered eating. There's usually something else underlying, but the language we use around food can actually make it more tenuous for people. So we like to keep it pretty factual, I guess you would say. You would talk about foods that are grown in nature, like your vegetables, your fruits, your plants, your nuts, your seeds. These are things that are like best friends for our one body for life and our one planet Earth. Like, if you have our foods, these are the messages that we use in our schools program, I should actually say. So we try to get the children to understand that the foods that are grown in nature, when we tune in and listen to our body, you will find that they are actually helping our body, and they also help the planet, because you can, feed the scraps to your chooks, or it can go back in compost, or and then we talk about foods that are from the factory. And we just say with foods that are made in the factory, what we need to do is be able to make friends with all of those, but understand that some are going to be friendlier for our one body for life than others. So we have that conversation about, okay, well, how do you determine, like, if you've got a bag of barbecue shapes or a bag of rice cakes, for instance, how do you determine which one's going to be friendlier for my one body for life? And you have that conversation about asking what's in my food, and then we flick across the conversation about the planet, because people are more open, particularly kids, to thinking about how are they affecting the planet. And so then we talk about the waste that gets created from all factory foods. So so keeping the language, I guess, kind of neutral. It's not labeling the food. It's actually connecting in how does it make us and the planet feel compared to the food itself.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that linking, Belle, between what you eat and then how you feel. Because I feel like it gives kids that responsibility and that power. I feel like it empowers them to make choices for how they feel. And I love how you're educating them about that this is our one body. Because I think
even as adults, we don't make that connection.
We forget that this is my one vehicle for this life, and I need to take care of it. So I love those messages. It's so cool.
Yeah.
And linking it with the planet.
Yeah.
Because it's all linked.
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
That's it.
And getting that connection is really, really important, because it's a simple message. In fact, we've just had our program, it's taken a year, but the University of Southern Queensland have evaluated it, and they actually have said that the simplicity of the messages is what's making the messages stick for the kids. So, yeah.
It's amazing.
So
yeah, absolutely amazing. So for anyone who's listening or watching the podcast, like you've acknowledged, they're most likely already on the same page as you and I when it comes to the importance of food for their kids. So how is it that they can work with you, and how is it that the work that you do can help them?
Well, I think I built the Mad Food Science Incursion, which is like our signature program that's been going for years, and we just I'm always innovating, looking at what's going on out there. So the messages have changed. They're essentially the same, but we've tweaked how we say it in the experiments. But one of the underlying messages in that program is really about saying to the kids, it doesn't matter what anybody else is eating. What's important is, how is the food that you're eating making you feel? Is it helping you learn? Is it helping you run around and play? Is it helping you be a good friend? So it doesn't matter what anybody else is eating. So for all the parents out there and the carers who are packing lunch boxes where their kids perhaps are sometimes saying it's not fair, like such and such has this, and we actually give those children, like your children, the courage to be, you know what, I don't really care because this is making me feel. And then on the flip side, it actually gets the kids who aren't having those kind of lunch boxes to start to think about, well, what can they do differently? So it makes your children more normal because they're the ones that are having it. So, and that was one of the very first messages that I created back when my daughter was getting teased, because I wanted her not to feel like she wasn't normal. Like, it's just, it's not fair that our kids who are eating well are made to feel like they're the odd ones out.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one way that we do it. And also what we know is that quite often, you can be in a circle of friends where you're doing this, but they're not. And so you are that mum. So by empowering kids with this information, we know it doesn't happen for every child, but at least if there's one, and we know that there's always more than one, goes home and they say to their parents, you know what, I learnt this today and I really don't want to have that anymore, or can I have more vegetables or whatever, then the kids are driving that change. And we've got story after story of parents telling us that that's happening. So, my hope is that...
It's like positive peer pressure, isn't it?
Yeah. My hope is that makes our other parents' jobs easier to get their kids to want to eat a wider variety, and therefore we become not the nut jobs. So, I really think that there's if schools weren't the place where kids hung out in droves, I wouldn't work in the school system, because it's actually really quite difficult to make your way in the schools. Even all these years, like over 10 years of working in schools, and you're still continually having to try to prove yourself, right? It's the education system for you. So going to the question of what can your listeners do, trust that I'm standing for you. We are right behind you 100% of the way. But how you could help us is to become, I guess, a bit of an advocate for the work that we do. And what that might look like is reaching out and talking to one of my certified instructors that's in your area, finding out a bit more about the program, and then taking that to your school, like going to the P&C meeting, or going and talking to the wellbeing officer, or even a teacher. It could be spreading the word. So if you're in a circle of parents at your school who are like you, getting them on board to be your army so that you can all go forward to put forward for the program. And I guess the last one is just keep doing what you're already doing. Be that stand for your kids' health. And I want to give people a bit of encouragement here, because it is difficult sometimes when you feel like you're swimming against the grain. And you think, what's it all for? Because, our kids do give us grief from time to time. So
every now and again.
Yeah. My daughter wrote me a letter for my birthday this year in January, and I just want to read a little bit of it to the mums out there to give you hope. She's now just turned 18 in May. To give you hope that your kids will learn to actually be grateful for what you've done for them. So let me just see. I'm forever grateful for your cooking skills. I've never met anyone else who is so consistently as well fed as I am, and I thank you massively for your part of what I keep thinking about when I go to America. I won't be able to get your food. The knowledge that you've taught me about food and cooking is invaluable, and I hope I can share it with my own children one day too.
Wow, it's amazing.
I still get goosebumps like reading it, and whenever I'm feeling like, what am I doing? And that's happens a lot. Like, why am I doing this, right? I have that literally sitting on my desk as a reminder, because if I can get that to happen for one other parent,
absolutely,
well, it changes whole trajectories of life, right?
Because like she said, it's not just her; it's her children and her children's children. It goes on and on.
Yeah,
totally. And I guess for me, it's like I want to say I'm so grateful, Belle, for the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
and also for parents, caregivers that are on this journey. That it is, it's really worthwhile work to have your kids develop a great relationship with food and with their body and the earth. That's what changes the world.
Yeah,
100%.
So we're going to add links in the show notes so that you can connect with Belle directly. There's not a week that goes by where I'm not asked by young mums, who are dismayed with what they're seeing in their own schools, in their own school canteens, who are that mum who packs the healthy lunchbox and is copping a heap of grief because of it and really wants to see change in their own school systems. It's hard. I know, as someone who's highly educated, my kids have gone to 2 different schools, and I've tackled or, worked within the school system to make change just on a personal level. And it is hard work. So to have a resource like what you offer, I think is so invaluable, because I really don't feel like it's something that you can tackle by yourself as a parent. As I said, even as an educated parent, I found it really tough, and I have to admit that I moved on. I did what I could do within my own school circle, but then I just decided that I had to lead by example. It kind of all got too much at one point. So, I really hope that, that more people can connect with you via this podcast. And thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, because we really can't allow this to continue on. I mean, thinking about it totally from the perspective of, let's talk about, just before we wrap up, cost of living, right? Because everybody's talking about cost of living, and the thing that we're pulling back on is the quality of the food that we're eating. And I personally, like, when you shop, you can make really wise and economical choices with the food that you make. But I believe that there's a bit of a ploy within the food manufacturing industry to be really talking up this cost of living message, because it drives people to be eating more convenience foods. Don't even get me started about what happened when the Olympics were on, but recognizing that there's that old adage that says you either pay for it now or you pay for it later. If our kids aren't eating well, then their immunity gets lower, then they get sick easier, which means you then have to stay home from work more, then you're at the doctors more, then you're buying medication more. There's a cost, and that cost could be delayed for a few weeks, it could be a couple of years, or it could be for lifelong at some point of time.
In the case of chronic conditions, which is what you've referenced, that's lifelong. You
well,
know,
not only
it's-
health-wise, but education-wise.
Yes.
Because if you've got a chronic health condition from a young age, you're less likely to go to school to get the education you need.
that's
You're
it.
less likely to build the social kind of connections, all these things that kind of
Yeah, like you
lead
said,
to you
that-
being a healthy adult.
Yeah, it's that domino effect, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
it is. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Belle. Have a great day.
I will. You too.
Thanks,
Thank
Belle.
you. See you, everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Raising Well-Nourished Kids podcast.
If you'd like to learn more about raising happy, emotionally resilient, food-loving kids, check out the Well Nourished Kids program or follow us at Well Nourished Kids on Instagram.
And if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd really love it if you could take a moment to leave a review, subscribe, and share with a few friends.
Remember, it takes a village, and we're here to support you on your parenting journey.
We'll catch you next time.